Hi, I'm Warren Throckmorton, and this is a bonus episode of the Christian Past That Wasn't podcast. The podcast highlights the book of the same name, which was published in May of this year by Broadleaf Books. Today, I want to bring you a discussion of the book involving philosopher Scott Coley and me at the Nooks Gallery and Book Shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania on July 30th, 2026. About 25 folks came to the event and participated in part of the discussion. By the way, if you are in Lancaster, you must visit Nooks on Prince Street. It's a lovely store with ample room to browse books and related items. Thanks to Shawn for allowing me to speak in his wonderful space. In this segment, I only have my responses to Scott's questions due to the relatively poor audio quality of the Q&A part of the evening. I'm working on enhancing that part of the recording and may bring that out at a later time. Scott is the author of the book Ministers of Propaganda and is no stranger to the study of false history being used in the service of political manipulation. His book is outstanding, and I highly recommend it. In fact, I did a bonus episode featuring it back when the podcast was titled Telling Jefferson Lies. Be sure to check the show notes for a link to that episode. Scott has also been a guest on the podcast in previous episodes. So, after a little bridge music, you'll hear the voice of Scott Coley at the Nooks Gallery.
Thanks so much, Shawn. Thank you all for being here. I have a few questions to ask Warren, but we thought we'd begin with an excerpt that gives a bit of a feel for what goes on in the book. And then I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Okay.
All right. Warren.
Well, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it a lot. And I want to start with a short section from chapter 1. Why do people believe America was founded as a Christian nation? Just a few words before I read it, the first couple of chapters. Before I get into all the fact checking, I try to lay a foundation for why would people believe these things anyway? What's behind it? So let me start with this in chapter 1. On June 19, 2024, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed a bill into law that requires all schools in the state, from kindergarten to college, to post a copy of the Ten Commandments in every classroom. Despite the fact that previous Supreme Court struck down similar laws as unconstitutional, the Louisiana legislature and Governor Landry were betting that the current Supreme Court might find in their favor and uphold the law. In June 2025, the federal appeals court blocked implementation of the law. Louisiana's Attorney General, Liz Murrill, pledged to appeal to the Supreme Court if necessary. At this writing, Texas and Arkansas passed similar laws, and 17 other states have considered similar bills. As part of the justification for the legislation, the author of the bill, Republican State Representative Dodie Horton, cited a quote she attributed to James Madison about the Ten Commandments. Section 4 of the new law reads, as quote, recognizing the historical role of the Ten Commandments accords with our nation's history and faithfully reflects the understanding of the founders of our nation with respect to the necessity of civic morality to a functional self-government. History records that James Madison, the fourth president of the United States of America, stated that, quote, "We have staked the whole future of our new nation upon the capacity of each of ourselves to govern ourselves according to the moral principles of the Ten Commandments," end quote. What a solid justification for posting the Ten Commandments. I mean, if James Madison, often regarded as the father of the Constitution, believed the Decalogue was the foundation of the nation, then how could posting them be considered unconstitutional? Surely Doty Horton's bill was just setting the record straight and righting a great historical wrong. You know where I'm going. There is a snag, however. James Madison never wrote or said those words. And that is a lot of what this book does. Is it sets out these fake stories and partially fake stories that are used to undergird public policy in the present, but does so falsely.
Excellent. All right. So for those here who haven't read the book yet, what would you add to that by way of sort of filling out what's the main thesis and the main takeaways?
Yeah. Well, the title of the book is The Christian Past That Wasn't. And so I do a fair amount of talking about those kind of.
Sorry, Warren, you're going to be stuck with me.
Hey, yeah, don't heckle me. Okay. Or city heckler. So I do a fair amount of identifying those kind of stories where the storyteller, Christian nation storyteller, says this is the way history was. As it turns out, it wasn't that way. Another story that comes to mind is Ben Franklin calling for prayer in the Constitutional Convention, June 28th. He stands up and he really does call for prayer, makes a motion. We should start every day with prayer. The Christian nationalist version of that is that they fell on their knees and prayed for hours. Or that they say, okay, let's get a clergy in here and we'll have prayer every day. The fact is they didn't even vote on the motion. They didn't ever vote on the motion. They respected Ben Franklin. He was, senior statesman, but they did not vote on the motion. They adjourned before any vote was taken. They never came back to it. All right, that's the fact. And so they're just one after another. I go through those kind of stories. That's the Christian past that wasn't. And I call it the Christian past because so many of those stories are set in a Christian context. And they're also used to try to make Christian points. All right. So there are other stories that don't involve religion that could be debunked as well. This is the Christian past that wasn't. There's also a Christian past that was. There were terrible things done in the nation's past that were done in the name of Christ, that were done in the name of Christianity. That's the Christian past that was. And because of those things, I make the case that in no way can the United States founding be considered Christian. And that's the other side of it, in a sense, is that the Christian nationalist attempts to whitewash that history. And I think that this book says, no, you really can't get away with that. You can't say that the founding of the United States was uniquely, robustly, Christian, and those kinds of things be just, overlooked, shunned aside. No, we have to look at the whole past. So the Christian past that wasn't, the Christian past that was.
Excellent. One thing that struck me is that these stories, like the Ben Franklin story, right, that you're presented with like literally half of the story, right? Mm-hmm. But then when you actually read the whole story, you come away more convinced that the nation wasn't founded as a Christian nation than if you hadn't heard any of the story. So it's like, no, they explicitly considered this and rejected it. It's not as though they just didn't think about it, right? And if they had, maybe they it would have been more of a Christian nation. Like, no, they thought about it. They decided no.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So in your,
Can I just riff on that a little bit?
please.
Not only does that kind of takeaway occur, but they didn't start the process with a mindset, hey, let's start a Christian nation, guys. When we get together in Philly, let's make a Christian nation. They didn't start out with that mindset. And so here it is, we're into June 28th. And Ben Franklin just thinks, hey, maybe we should start praying. So if the whole process was intended to be the formation of a Christian government, what happened for the first month or so? They really weren't thinking along those lines.
Well, Warren, it's because the states had religious establishment, right? And so they thought, well, the states are going to take care of it, so we don't need an established religion at the federal level.
Yeah. Well, they did have that, and some of them liked that idea, and some of them didn't. Some of them didn't like it so much that they decided they didn't want it at the federal level. They had this long history of, dissenters being persecuted in the states. And, lo and behold, after the federal constitution came on board, I mean, it didn't take that long before the state constitution started doing away, or the state government started doing away with their established state churches and their requirements for belief in God in order to hold office. So, that's an argument that I take up in the book. But when you really look at the flow of history, what was the trend? The trend was toward disestablishment, not to keep those state establishments. So if that was the point of the federal constitution, it didn't work out very well.
And indeed is another situation where it's not as though it just hadn't occurred to establish religion.
Right. They knew how to do it, and they knew how to undo it.
Yeah. Okay, so in your discussion of what you call Myth 6, which is that America's virtues justify America's sins, you talk about the human tendency to massage facts or develop stories in an effort to justify bad behavior. And I think that goes a long way in explaining why people are eager to accept, frankly, really bad reasoning and poor evidence for the claim that the U.S. is a Christian nation with a special relationship to God. So before we get into the specifics of some of the bad reasoning and the poor evidence, more of those specifics, could you talk a bit about this tendency to rewrite history in an effort to legitimize vicious aspects of our nation's history?
Yeah. In social psychology, there's a concept called self-promotion. You want to make yourself look good. And in the book, I talk about self-justifying historians. This is not a concept unique to me. I borrow it from social psychology. Self-serving bias, group-serving bias, these are tendencies that social psychologists have documented, that we tend to want to see ourselves in the best possible light. And what Christian nationalists tend to do with history is to want to see history in the best possible light. And so it's not always for public policy purposes. I mean, it often is. But it's also because, we'd like to see ourselves as being members of a good country. I'm an American. I'd like to be a good American. I'd like to think that my nation is a good nation. I'm a Christian. That's part of my identity. I'd like to think that my religion is a good religion, and that people who identify as Christians in the past or the present wouldn't engage in really atrocious acts. And so whitewashing history, finding the best in history, wanting not to see the checkered part of history, is a kind of defense mechanism. I taught social psychology for many years. And when I taught self-serving bias, I just couldn't help thinking about the way Christian nationalists operate with, the reality of the indigenous people, the way that the immigrants dealt with indigenous people, and the way they broke the promises, broke the treaties, and all of that thing, and somehow made the the indigenous people look like the bad guys. So they could preserve their view of themselves as being the good guys in the situation. And so all those psychological maneuvers that are part of maintaining your integrity of your psychological self can be applied to how you handle history. Historians are people too. And that goes all the way back to the early historians of American history. And I have a section on this in the book where I talk about the early historians really wanted to paint a picture of the early settlers as being, noble individuals who came to benefit the Native Americans in some way, and it was good for them to be destroyed. The whole picture was, or the whole idea was to create a picture that was in very real ways a false picture. But it was one that let them see themselves as the good guys. And that's how I think that it works, is that self-justification, self-serving bias, group-serving bias, very powerful mechanisms that work at the group level as well as at the individual level.
Okay, so you have an account. This is, I suspect kind of related, but you have an account about this exchange between Mark Knoll and George Marsden and Francis Schaeffer. This is on pages 62 and 63. I'm going to read a couple of quick excerpts. So Francis Schaeffer is sort of a culture warrior figure, right? And is that a fair characterization? Is that uncharitable? Okay, all right.
Just maybe understated a bit.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, okay. That's good. So that was just dry wit then.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So the first letters, these letters among Marsden, Knoll, and Schaeffer, this was to do with, the background has to do with defending the teaching of creationism in public schools. I think that's sufficient for background. The first letters characterized the tone of the exchange through the years, including when Knoll got involved. Each side, that is Schaeffer on the one hand, Mark Knoll on the other, each side seemed to have different objectives. Knoll and Marsden, for those who are unaware, Knoll and Marsden are eminent historians of particularly of religion in the American context. Knoll and Marsden wanted to get accurate history in front of the public, and the Schaeffers, that is Francis and his son Frankie, who since changed his perspective, wanted to present information that could help win the culture war as they understood it. Skipping ahead a few paragraphs here. After a while, Schaeffer became convinced that Marsden, Knoll, and Christian academic historians were the bad guys for wanting accurate history. He then questioned Knoll's religious beliefs, wondering whether Knoll had a, quote, weakened view of scripture. And in the margin, I wrote every time, because that's always where it ends up. Oh, you must, you have, a different a view about sort of the material conditions of American history. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you must have a weak view of scripture.
Right.
What?
Right.
But that's the move. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So
and that way we can dismiss you.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. So that's the question.
You can't possibly be one of us if you think differently about American history here.
Mm-hmm. So I found this whole account that you give absolutely fascinating, especially the bit where Schaeffer questions Knoll's regard for scripture. Can you draw applications to the present day culture warring, or whatever you want to say to expound on that?
Well, I think, and I think you were out in front of me on that. That is the move. That if you differ on what I would consider these peripheral issues, religiously speaking, I mean, your view of American history here is religiously not relevant, theologically not pertinent. Although, and this may be a little bit far afield of your question, but in Christian nationalism, denominational differences really don't matter much. What matters is you hold the right political idea and that you support the same candidate I do, who will bring us power. That is because in Christian nationalism, the Christian is sort of non-functional. The nationalism really takes over all of that. And so maybe that's part of the answer to your question, is that what happens today is Christian organizations are, I mean, I have a hard time seeing them as Christian. They're really more political organizations. You know, I heard you mouth Franklin Graham. You know, it seems to be you didn't say, yeah, you did. Okay. I didn't want to mishear you, you know.
I'm saying I can't believe it.
Yeah. Or, you know, a family research council. You know, they've not said a whole lot about the family or research for a long time. It's not been about that for a long time. And honestly, I'm old enough to remember when Family Research Council was started, and they actually put out research briefs. Well, now it's all political. It's just all who you support and what policy you support and that kind of thing. They don't do research anymore. Focus on the family. I remember, I mean, it wasn't great advice, but I remember when that's what they gave was, you know, parenting advice, and it wasn't telling you how to vote. And, you know, and on that point, also in that chapter, I talk about focus on the family, using deceptive methods to keep false historical information on the website because it was beneficial. Now, you know, where is it written in the manual to run a Christian organization that you use false information because it's beneficial? But that's what happens, is that the Christian part is just, you know, it's an adjective or something. It's just, this is the kind of the team we're on, but it has nothing to do with what we do.
So, at the risk of belaboring the point, what do you make of the fact that folks in conservative Christian media, publishing, radio, etc., they know full well that the historical claims around Christian nationalism are simply false, as you document, right?
Yeah.
And yet they continue promoting this mythology as historical fact. So, based on your email exchanges that you document in the book, I could see them reading your book and just sort of shrugging and saying, "Yeah, but the mythology is beneficial." That word, beneficial.
Yeah.
Beneficial to whom? For what purpose? But how do you make sense of this?
Oh, well, as I said, now I'm describing it. I'm not explaining it. But by describing it, I mean that I'm saying what happens when politics becomes the focus is, again, I'm not explaining it, but what seems to happen is that the religion part, the mission part, the part that is about helping the less fortunate or saving souls or anything related to religion, that seems to become secondary. And it's more important to get the candidate elected because your focus has changed to winning the culture through political means rather than through religious means or theological means. Instead of convincing people that the philosophy and the morality of Jesus is transformative, what you really believe is that what's transformative is your candidate or their vote or laws that are passed. And it betrays your real belief about what actually works. And if false information works to get your candidate elected or to get your policies passed, then that's what you do. I mean, the false information won't, you know, it might hinder somebody from accepting the truth of your religion, but that's not what you're about anymore.
Okay, so I think we could divide the historical myths that you discuss in the book into basically the historical myths into two buckets: biographical and legal. So what I mean by biographical is biographical myths have to do with the spirituality of the individuals who composed our nation's founding documents, right? So, for example, Thomas Jefferson was an Orthodox Christian who would be completely at home in like a non-denominational evangelical church.
Then there's the funny ones and the not funny ones. That's a funny one.
Right. Okay, so that's on the biographical side, right? And then you've got what we'll call legal myths, which have to do with claims about the legal status of Christianity in our nation's founding documents.
Okay.
And it seems to me that Christian nationalists play these two types of myths off of each other, right? So when you point out that there's nothing in the legal case, like actually the Constitution doesn't say anything about this being a Christian country, then they say, they'll revert to the spirituality of the founders and say, well, it's all implied, right? They were Christians. They didn't even think to mention it. Yeah. When you point out that actually many of the founders weren't really Orthodox Christians, they revert to claims about the state constitutions or colonial charters, right? Kind of like I did when we were opening up.
Okay.
So could you talk a bit about this dialectic, like how really, I think you've provided a public service by breaking all of these things down in a really meticulous way, so that, I don't know that David Barton's going to be convinced by your book, but at least, but at least, I read it and it's like, okay, this is helpful to sort of retain my sanity in the face of these points. But how do you see your work fitting into that dialectic?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it quite like that, but I think that makes some sense. And they do move to what might work with whatever audience, is in front of them. So yes, I think that is possible. My way of thinking of this is that Christian nationalists are not about understanding history, they're about using it. And, I think that maybe another way of talking about what you're saying is that if the one argument doesn't work, then we'll use the other. I don't see it as particularly coherent. I think that in the same talk, we're talking David Barton right now, we could talk about any number of people, but they'll make every argument you can make. And whether it's consistent, internally or not. And so I also think of it this way. In the book, I take up arguments that are false, partially false, irrelevant, true but irrelevant. Like, let's take the faith of the founders. There were Orthodox Christians who were founders. I mean, some of the founders were Orthodox Christians. Some we don't know for sure. George Washington, and who knows? He wouldn't tell anybody. He was asked a number of times, do you believe in Jesus? And he would always get out of answering that question. He maybe wrote about Jesus, mentioned the name of Jesus once, and then implied it another time. But was he Orthodox and unorthodox? I don't know if he was for sure. But does it matter? Does it really matter? Because to me, what matters is what the framers did. Now, what matters for our system of government? What matters is what they did when they went into that hot room in Philadelphia in 1787. And so, I think what some people who are trying to offset or, respond to Christian nationalists do is they hear these quotes from some of the founders or people who lived in the founding era. They weren't even in the room, in Philadelphia, but they sound very pious and very Christian, very Orthodox. And they think, well, I don't know how to answer that. Is that really true? Some of them are true. But what does it really matter? Because they either weren't in the room, or when they got in the room, they still said, there's not going to be a religious test for serving in this government. They didn't put God in the Constitution. They didn't mention Jesus Christ as being the religion of this new republic that we're establishing. And so they could all have been as orthodox as can be, but they decided not to make the system of government an Orthodox Christian system of government. Mm-hmm. So again, true, some Orthodox founders, but irrelevant, really, to the idea of what system of government do we have. We have a system of government that is open to all people, all religions or no religion, but allows for freedom of religious expression. Again, not just for Christians, but for all religions or no religion. Freedom of conscience. And that's what all those maybe Orthodox people did. That to me is a bigger headline. That all those really religious guys said, let's just let everybody do what they want. We've got experience with making them do what they don't want. And, a lot of blood spilt. Let's do it a different way. with this federal government.
So before we open up for other folks to ask questions, is there anything you want to add about what you hope the book accomplishes now that it's out in the world?
Well, as I said, you asked about the fact that Christian leaders, and I mean, not just Christian leaders, but political leaders use these stories for political purposes. I would like to see, I know it's, there's more than one motive here, but I would like to see people have this information so they can counter it. If the leaders have the information and people who follow don't, they're a lot easier led down the path of error. But if everybody has the information, then they can say, no, I know you're telling me a story. And that's what I hope this book will go at least some distance to accomplish, is so that you can say, no, you're telling me a story. And I know you're just trying to manipulate me, and I will not be manipulated.
As noted earlier, there was a Q&A portion of the evening. At the end of that time, I was asked to close the event with a reading. I chose page 224 under the subtitle, Who's Missing in This History? I want to close the bonus episode with that reading as well. I'll have just a few more things to say on the other side of the reading.
So we thought we would close out the discussion with another excerpt.
Page 224, Who's Missing in This History? Despite all the Puritan sermons, Ben Franklin's calls to prayer, Mason Weems' stories, and David Barton's artifacts, some voices were silenced throughout the entire period America was supposedly being inspired by God Almighty. While the white men were arguing and agonizing over their religious freedom, black people had no freedom of any kind. Indigenous people saw their civilization slowly stolen and their families decimated. Women couldn't vote until long after the founding of the country. The history I've written about thus far has been a white man's history. The myths I've discussed thus far are in the service of propping up a view of America that ran parallel to the reality of race-based chattel slavery and the theft of land and life from indigenous people. White culture warriors want to argue about America as a Christian nation based upon how many Bible verses the Founding Father used in a speech, or what orthodox doctrine a white slave-owning founder admitted to believing in a letter to another white slave-owning founder. How is it possible to focus on a small matter of what the founders said they believed when the weightier matter of the sin they lived with every day is right there with no comment? Indeed, we come to a central question of this entire project. This question occupies the space between the Christian past that was and the Christian past that wasn't. It's the one that no Christian nationalist storyteller has ever adequately answered. It's this: with deception, theft, racism, enslavement, lynchings, and other atrocities embedded in the heritage and history of the nation, what does it matter how many times God is mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, or whether there is some faint echo of a Bible verse in the Constitution? Christian nationalist history strains out gnats and swallows camels.
I again want to thank Scott Coley for his scholarship and his involvement in the evening. Thanks to Shawn Smucker at Nooks for organizing and hosting the event. Thanks to Andrew Berg for pointing me in Shawn's direction. Thanks to all the folks who came out to the event and enriched my life with their presence and questions. There are still copies of The Christian Past That Wasn't available, so listeners can get one wherever books are sold. For information and buying options, go to christianpast.com. That's christianpast.com. If you liked the episode, please leave a lovely rating, and as always, thanks for listening.